I think it's worth outlining one of the biggest traps that people seem to fall foul of. And that is still seeing anxiety, or more specifically OCD, as the problem, rather than zooming out and recognizing it as the symptom of your underlying anxiety. And not only anxiety, but also worry, mental catastrophizing, exhaustion, the brain's conditioning, boredom, loneliness, anger, low self-esteem, and your deep state of programming from the external world. So if we flip back to OCD, or should I say complex anxiety, do you want to be run by your little 8-year-old or yourself with a little s who sees itself as a thinking creature trying to control emotions, therefore trying to talk you out of living an exciting life using fear, worry and pessimism? Or would you prefer to operate from the self with the big S, the observer, who consciously, lovingly and optimistically talks you into living your purpose? And this comes from a more courageous and active life, full of emotional ups and downs, which is okay because we are emotional creatures who learn to think, and that thinking can be modified. Which of these perspectives do you want to be the primary voice in your head? And as I keep saying, calmness is an inside job. Only you can fix yourself by thinking and acting like somebody else repeatedly until those thinking and behaving patterns have woven themselves into your brain's circuitry and become your new operating system and your new unconscious responses. Therefore, the big question that arises is, who is the somebody else whose thoughts and behavior patterns you will copy to create the new you that you'd like to become, but don't yet believe that you can? Therefore, who you receive your reassurance from matters enormously. However, this usually comes from the person involved in your initial programming, like your mother or father, or somebody who cares about you very deeply, like your partner. They try to calm you down rather than talking you into moving towards the problem or sitting with the discomfort, which is the exposure model that we know works so well. Whereas if the person was to say, don't be so silly, that will never happen, you're just doing drama here, okay? Actually, that's a far more truthful statement, which shows the sufferer there are other ways of looking at life and encouraging them to take responsibility for letting go of control in that moment. So what I'd like to do is to explore some typical complex anxiety scenarios and compare receiving reassurance or opposingly allowing yourself to be exposed to that fear and changing your story about it. The anxious person might say, I think my car may have hit somebody whilst driving home from work, so do you think I should drive back and check? And the reassuring person might say, don't worry, I'm sure you didn't. It'll be fine, don't worry about it. However, this leaves the door open for more what-if questions. Like, well, yeah, but what if I did, you know? And what if they took my number? What if somebody reports me for doing a hit and run? Whilst from the other end of the spectrum, the response might be, don't be childish. You'd know if you hit a person. Let me help you sit with this discomfort so that anxious energy can escape from you. We can do some conscious placebo routines, such as I surrender to those old thoughts. I'm a safe driver. Driving offers me freedom. Yeah? I like the freedom of driving. I'm a very, very good driver. Can you see that common sense prevails because the opportunity for what-if ruminations is restricted? Plus the anxious person is hearing the truth of how the other person truly sees the world. Now, obviously, the person with the complex OCD, complex anxiety, they're not going to like this. But that's the point. We're moving to help them sit with the anxiety rather than doing the compulsions to relieve the stress of the anxiety. And the more we try to meet an anxious person at their worldview, the more they think that their view is standard and that ours is similar. That's why I never try to reassure an anxious person. I just tell them my perspective on that point. But I do help them to calm down through breathing, through the tap-in, through placebo, and you know, all the things we've been talking about. But I won't reassure them on their OCD perspective or any unhelpful belief systems. Let me give you an example. I was recently working with a man in his 20s who was living at home with his mother. And he said, I'm too scared to leave the house because I may get infected and pass that on to my mum and she may die. And he had drastically limited venturing outdoors to almost an absolute minimum. And when he returned, he had to shower, he had to wash his clothes, and he had to perform perform a whole set of routines to calm himself down and to keep his mother safe and alive. And I asked him, does your mum know about this? And he said, yeah, she does. So I asked, how does she reassure you? And he said, well, she says, don't worry. As long as you take precautions, we'll be fine. But something in my head didn't feel right. My intuition, we could say here, okay? So I said, does she know that you're doing all these things and you're staying at home so that she doesn't catch it and die? Okay? That you are taking responsibility for her being alive. And he thought for a moment and he said, well, not directly. I just say that out there feels contagious and I want us to be safe. So I changed the perspective and I asked if his mother was in the house because we were doing a video conference call. And he said she was, so I asked if I could speak with her. And he nervously went off and he got her. And when she sat down, we had a little chat. And then I asked her, did you know, okay, that your son's greatest fear is that he will infect you and that you will die? And she was pretty shocked. And she said, no, I thought he was just petrified of becoming infected. And so I've been reassuring him that he'll be fine if he takes sensible precautions. And she looked at him and she said, is that true? You're doing all of this to yourself so I don't die? And he sheepishly, but truthfully, he said, yeah, I am. And she laughed. And she said, surely you should only worry to the degree that I worry and take precautions only to the degree that I take precautions myself. Otherwise, your actions are a waste of time. And then she became more truthful. See, there's that word again, truthful. Okay? And she said, actually, I haven't told you this, but I've been meeting up with my friends to go shopping and I've been having lunch with them. But I haven't told you this because I didn't want to make your anxiety worse. Then they both laughed. And then they both broke into tears, okay, as that trapped trauma and all that frustration that they'd been holding down suddenly began to release. And when they calmed down, we agreed on a plan where he only needed to protect her to the degree that she protected herself. Okay? And he had to let go of taking responsibility for her health because that's her business. But he should take responsibility for his own health. That's good. And soon after that, they went out for lunch together because the story had changed. So my advice for those who support a person with anxiety or OCD is don't reassure them, okay? But do help them to calm down and to see the problem from new perspectives. I worked with a man who had an OCD, a complex anxiety fixation with his oven and his cooking hob. Yeah? And he had to keep checking that it was off. And he would often get up in the night to check. And occasionally, when he was really super stressed by the whole thing, he couldn't even go to work because the fear and the urge to keep checking was just overwhelming and prevalent. The hob was gas and the oven electric. And he was consistently looking for reassurance from his wife, who would often have to go with him to check it, okay, so that he could calm down. Yeah? Even though 10 minutes later, he would need to recheck because he was fearful and anxious again. Now, to me, this infers that he trusts her one moment, but not the next. So this perspective of trust was being flipped back and forth and used as a stick to keep prodding the same old problem. And a quick note here, if you've got OCD and you've got these feelings, okay, stop looking for the feeling of completion in your body. This is a trap, and it's not the truth of anything. So many people tell me I have to keep washing my hands and washing my hands and washing my hands until it feels right. This is a trap. We are learning to trust ourselves and life by optimistically letting go of control, ignoring thoughts, and becoming more comfortable with emotional discomfort until it becomes no longer uncomfortable. Now, if we pause here for a second and we step back and we take a snapshot of the situation and then move to a perspective, a new perspective, it might look like this. His wife, who's his primary source of reassurance, is very aware that you can leave a gas hob on all night. You can leave it on all night if you wish. She knows that some people use a gas hob as a heat source for their kitchen in winter. She knows that it's not checking the cooker is off that's the problem, it's checking if anything flammable is within reach of the flame, which is a sensible precaution. She knows that you can leave a cooker on or a stove on for days without any issues. That's what they're designed to do. And she knows that if there was food in the cooker and it was burning, or if gas was escaping, the alert from the fire detectors would warn of the problem, which safely precedes any actual danger. Therefore, in a common sense way of thinking, checking the fire detectors is probably more important than checking if the cooker is off. She knows that in many third world countries, people live in highly flammable shacks, tents or wooden huts with a great big fire in the middle that burns all night while they sleep, and those families seem to be okay. Yeah? She knows that there was never a fire from an unattended cooker in her whole life, except that one deep fat frying pan fire back in 1987, which she extinguished with a wet tea towel, which was a cooking problem and not a cooker being left on problem. She knows that children learn faster and better by making mistakes like burning their fingers rather than being shouted at, and thus programmed to stay away from potentially dangerous objects like engaging with life by anxious and fearful parents. But that wasn't what she said. She was meeting him at his erroneous perspective, saying things like, well, you know it's off as you checked it. You know you checked it because we took the photograph of the dials. You know? We'd be able to smell gas if something was leaking. She's not strongly enough challenging him to see it differently and then to learn to sit with the discomfort, which is the exposure therapy I'm going to go on and on about, and I'm going to keep going on and on about, okay? Because it's the way out. Perhaps if we go to an extreme view, if on day one of his anxiety, when he said, I need to go back and recheck the stove is off, she said, stop being childish. It doesn't matter, come to bed. I don't want to live with somebody who's a worry guts, okay? Have a little trust, have a little bit of faith in yourself, okay? Perhaps his complex anxiety might have struggled to get a grip or to worm its way into that particular form of sabotage. Because as I keep saying, whatever thoughts you run the most or are exposed to the most becomes the ones that program your unconscious mind, regardless of their truth and regardless of whether they serve your well-being or not. And that's just a fact. So, as you begin to stand up to your complex anxiety, it's helpful to work closely with the person who reassures, making sure they're helping you change your story, not just helping you to get through that moment.